Hi everybody and welcome to another video. My name is Richard Seidlitz, I'm the owner of Redpants.lol, and today I am sweating in the humid heat of Florida. My first video after a long time was after we had moved down here, and I was talking about how nice the weather was. It was absolutely gorgeous and I was really having a great time of it, and now I am dying of humidity and it's still not even the thick of summer yet, so all y'all need to pray for me. What I am doing tonight is I am changing the catalytic converters in my red V8 Vantage project car. This is a 4.3 liter V8 Vantage manual from 2007. It's got about 45,000 miles, give or take a couple thousand. I don't really drive it too much. Claire does all the driving in it. But basically what we're doing today is we're installing a few things that I've grouped together as sort of a performance package. When people ask me how to get more performance and more noise out of their V8 Vantage, the first thing I always recommend is high flow cats and a tune. So what I have in front of me are the high flow cats, the original cats, the tune, some gaskets, some tools, and a beer, because God help me, I need it. What I'm going to do really quickly is I'm going to talk about what's in front of me. Basically, these are 200 cell catalytic converters. Cells are basically think of it as how much material, how much catalyst material is inside of the catalytic converter. The originals are 600 cell catalytic converters. These are 200 cell. If you have a 4.7 liter and you get high flow cats, you're going to get 100 cell. So those are actually the secondary catalytic converters in a 4.7 liter, because those have catalytic converters built into the exhaust manifolds or the headers as well. To recap all of this, I do have a performance modification guide set up on my website, redpants.lol, under the modifications section. I think it's called power modifications or something along those lines, and it goes through a whole bunch of stuff. As of this filming, I'm still working on building it, but if you've got a 4.3 liter, I've already started doing some information on there about especially getting better response out of the car, and I'm working on these exhaust modifications as well. But what I wanted to show you by laying this out is the difference between the 600 cell and the 200 cell cats. That's the main thing that we're worried about here because of two things. One is that you're going to get better performance because these act as basically as a restriction. It's kind of like breathing through a pillow. If you look inside of this, which I know you can't see in it right now, but when you look through there, you basically see this really dense mesh. And the mesh is made out of, among other things, platinum and some other stuff. So if you've ever heard of people's catalytic converters getting stolen, it's because there's valuable materials inside of these cats. That's also why you'll see a difference between prices on catalytic converters. Basically, all it is a big tube with small tubes attached. Inside is what really matters though. So if you see a catalytic converter that's selling for next to nothing, chances are the catalyst material inside is where they cheaped out, and that's where you can start running into issues. So what we're looking at right now are the placement of the O2 sensors. The ones right here are the upstream O2 sensors. These are the ones that go bad fairly often on the V8 Vantage. The reason is because they have got exhaust gases flowing directly at them from the engine. Right here, attached on this side, is the exhaust manifold. That's coming directly out of the engine and straight into here. You've got that sensor that sticks down through there. On the 4.7 liter, it's not as much of an issue because they have catalytic converters built into those manifolds. But on the 4.3 liters, it's in the direct line of path, and that's why you have those issues. Next, we have our downstream O2 sensors. That's right here. And if you'll notice that even though these have 1/3 the cell count for the catalyst material, the O2 sensors are spaced the same distance apart. And what that allows you to do is a few things. One is you don't have to change anything about the catalyst. As far as how it's positioned in the car or where the O2 sensors are, the O2 sensors go right into the same spot they were on the original cats. Second, if you don't want to get a tune, which I do recommend you get it because it comes with a bunch of benefits and it's worth every single one of them, but if you don't get the tune, then you don't have to worry about it as long as you've got good quality catalyst material, because you're still getting all that catalyzation going on between the upstream and the downstream sensors. What's happening is a reading is being taken at the beginning and then a reading is being taken at the end between those two sensors, and the computer is analyzing the difference between them. That difference tells the computer how effective that catalyst is being. If you don't have a good catalyst material, you're going to end up getting some check engine lights for emission warnings. As long as you have a high quality catalyst material, you're fine. The rest of that catalyst is back here. and you can see that there's just nothing. I mean, you can see this is how far the OEM cat goes, where there's a whole bunch of catalyst. I mean, it's basically, it's about 2/3 of the catalyst. Go figure, it's 200 versus 600 cell count, but that much catalyst isn't even being monitored. That's how you can get away without a tune and still be able to have no check engine lights for the high flow cats. So the ones I'm installing are from Velocity AP, if the stickers didn't give it away. These came with the parts, and these are labeled right hand and left hand. So when we look at them, there is a nifty badge on there, and it will say, among other things, RHS for right hand side and LHS for left hand side. And just to keep things clear on these, I did label these as well, so I put my little, well, it's upside down, right hand on this side. Doesn't really matter, I'm not using these ever again. But it's not a terribly difficult job if you're using good catalysts that have everything set up the way they need to be set up. There is two big challenges. One is that the top nut or stud, depending on which cat you're putting in, is difficult to reach. It's only difficult to reach if you don't know about wobbly joints. I talked about these in my last video about spark plugs. These things can be a lifesaver, and it basically just creates a bendable joint between a socket and an extension and a ratchet, all that sort of stuff. The trick to getting the topmost stud is you take I use a lot of medium depth sockets. These things are a lifesaver and essential for jobs like the exhaust manifolds. But I have a 13mm socket, a wobble joint, and an extension. And you can get a longer extension this, but don't go any shorter. This is what, a 6-inch extension, I think. And basically between that and a ratchet, you can get that top stud very easily by going past the O2 sensors. So obviously for this job, ratchet, extension, wobble joint, 13mm socket. You're also going to need a 13mm box end. It does help if you have one that's got the ratcheting gear on the opposite side. It does make things a little bit quicker, but it's not entirely essential. But the box end is, because you will need that to get to certain spaces. You're not going to be able to get the ratcheting end on all sides. You need the open box end to get to certain spots. The other thing I've got is a 22mm box end wrench. This is for the spark plugs. You don't have to remove the spark plugs in order to do this job unless you're changing the spark plugs. If you've got the original spark plugs on a 4.3 liter, it might be worthwhile to do it because most of this job is just the labor getting things taken out. It's the hardest part about this, especially since, you know, it's a 11, 12-year-old car with 40 some odd thousand miles on it, and this is some of the most abused environment there is. So the O2 sensors and the cats, exhaust systems in general, see a lot of abuse, so it's good to have good stuff when you're doing this. You'll also want to have some WD-40, which is probably underneath the car. WD-40, PB Blaster, or some other rust-busting agent. You're going to want to spray this on the bolts and studs and everything else before you get started and let it soak for a while. Also make sure your car is very cold. When you're under the car, any heat at all is going to make you cook. If you touch anything, it's going to burn you. So make sure the car is very cooled off, cool to the touch. The last thing I have over here is a rubber mallet. This helped me to get the O2 sensors sort of unfrozen from the catalyst when I was trying to remove them. It does help if you have some anti-seize. I highly recommend using anti-seize on all the nuts and bolts and everything else when you reassemble this, and on the O2 sensors. It will make this a lot easier to do the next time it comes around. If you need to change your O2 sensors down the road, or you want to change something out, it just makes it a lot easier down the road. The package that I'm installing is what I call a stage 1 package because it's sort of the go-to bundle of parts. High flow cats, tune. This does come with new bolts, nuts, and gaskets. It makes it nice and easy for installation, so you don't have to worry about destroying any of those things as they're coming out. You will notice that the factory catalysts have studs on them. There's 2 studs on each, and then 1 nut and bolts that's also on there. The new ones do not have those. Those are going to be all nuts and bolts. And then I think that basically covers the setup of this. We're gonna go underneath the car to show you how there are a couple of tricks to do this. Before I start, typical gains from this, that's gonna be the obvious thing. Typical gains are between 10 and 15 horsepower for the catalyst alone. along with that, you get a more aggressive exhaust note. It doesn't change the way the exhaust sounds, it just makes it a little louder, because this basically acts as a huge muffler underneath the car, and this reduces the size of that muffling. And these also weigh about 4 pounds less per catalyst, so you're also saving about 8 pounds between the two of them. So if you're a weight junkie like I am, it does add up quite a bit. The headers and muffler, especially the muffler, will also add to that whenever you get around to doing those. Let's go ahead and get under the car and take a look at a few things.
All right, here we are under the car, and you can see where the exhaust manifolds end right there. On this one, I still have one of those studs that's inside of the exhaust manifold flange. I'm just going to leave that there. Chances are I'll be putting headers on this car down the road anyway, so I'm not too worried about taking it out. On the other one, all of them are gone. Part of that is just to make it easier to reinstall things, is you can use that stud as a hanger. It'll kind of free up a hand for you, make it a little bit easier. Up above, the O2 sensors are still all there. They're just kind of hanging out. I'll be putting a little anti-seize on those when I put them back in. When we move back a bit, you can see these clamps. These are the clamps, especially that one. I took the bolt out of the other, but this one you can see, it's basically a bent bolt, which is slightly curved, which is supposed to conform a little bit to the shape of the clamp. On one end is a solid, basically the right-hand side that you're looking at is just a solid end of it. There's no way to spin that, but it's got sort of a notch on it that keeps it from rotating. On the left-hand side, you can see a nut and a washer. Basically, all you do is you loosen the nut and washer to give the clamp space to spread out. Don't be afraid to use a bit of force to spread open that clamp either. It's just a big ring that's got a split in it. You're going to need to pull that apart to push it back off of the cats when you're removing them. When we come back a little bit, you can see these guys right here. This is the hanger for the mid-pipe. These are T30 Torx bolts, and they're going to be very rusty. You may not have to remove these, you may not have to loosen them. I loosened them. I pulled one out just to see if I had a match sitting inside, and I don't, which is kind of unfortunate because I wanted to replace them, but they're out in the open so I can change them at any time. These are holding the mid-pipe to a hanger right here. Now, this becomes important because this is sort of a carrying point for the pipes. Now, to get the catalyst out of the manifolds, since there's at least one stud here and there's also studs on the catalyst, you need to pull the catalyst back towards the rear of the car. To do that, this mid-pipe has to be pushed back to the rear of the car. So you're going to be pushing everything to the rear, starting at the mid-pipe's back, and that's going to give you about an inch and a half of space where you can sort of pull the catalyst out of the exhaust manifolds and to bring them down. When you do that, if you have an extra set of hands, it may be easier to drop the catalyst a bit and have one person holding the catalyst while the other person removes the O2 sensors. That's a lot easier than trying to get the box end wrench above it. If you don't have an extra set of hands, it's still possible to do that. It just may be a bit more difficult. It's definitely a lot more difficult if you're doing this on jack stands because you have no leverage, and when they're tough to get out and not having any leverage, it kind of sucks. That's why I had the mallet. I wouldn't necessarily need the mallet if I was doing this on a lift, but this is garage style, so we're doing things the hard way. Now, getting things put back together is another trick, and I'm going to show you that in just a minute. We now have the first catalytic converter installed. As you can see, I've reused the hardware on that bottom nut and stud. The one right there on the side is one of the new ones, and on the top that you can't see is the other new one. Here we have the O2 sensors are now back in place. One of the tricks, and you can see it on that one, that you can do while installing the O2 sensors is to spin them up in the opposite direction that you're going to be winding them in. And you can see it's kind of coiled up right there. That's done on purpose because as you're installing the O2 sensor, you're going to be twisting it, and that twist is going to affect the cable that's attached to it. By pre-twisting it, you're actually getting it ready to be installed with the cord straight. One way that you could do this pretty easily is that when you're undoing the O2 sensor from the catalytic converter to begin with, you coil it up and you make sure it stays coiled. That way you don't have to guess how many times to twist it in advance before you reinstall it. So the last little tip that I'm going to have for you guys before I button this up is to show you on this top spot right here. The trick to this one is that you put in the bolt, you put the catalytic converter up there, and you start spinning on the nut. And because of how tight it is, it may be easier, and this is actually really easy on these. You can see how much space there is around these ones. It's more of an issue on the 4.7 liter cars, but basically you're going to put the bolt through right here, and as you slowly set the flange in here for the catalytic converter and you start threading the nut on the end of that bolt, you slowly push the flange against the other flange. The idea is that the space in this little crook, and I'm going to show you on here, imagine if this was super close together. Imagine if that was super close together and you couldn't get a nut in between those two because the bolt was sticking too far through. Well, this way, when the flange is out here, the nut can go on there. It's kind of a weird thing to describe, and I'll have to do another video to show it, but this is sort of just giving you an idea of how to do it. So what I'm going to do next is finish installing this catalytic converter on this side has to go in, and then I'm going to pull it out and do another sound test. And I've got some before and after footage that I've taken, and I'm hoping it comes out okay so we can do a back-to-back comparison. Okay, as you can see, I've got the catalyst back in place. These are the high flow cats. The trick to doing this is to put the rear clamps on first. The reason is because you're going to be trying to move the whole rear section of the exhaust back up after you've already pushed it back to get the original cats out. You need to pull that whole thing back up. The easiest way to do this and to ensure these rearmost clamps get on the proper way is put those on first. The O2 sensors are much easier to access with a smaller catalyst, so that's much easier to do. I usually do those first as just an easy way to get them up there, but that's totally up to you. With the smaller catalyst, you can get away with doing them second or even last. What I've got up front are the bolts and nuts that I've basically just started threading without tightening down. That way I know that the catalysts are lined up front while I tighten up these rear clamps. Once you've got the rear clamps done and the O2 sensors and those front nuts and bolts all tightened down, make sure you don't forget your gaskets, by the way. That's very important to remember you have those gaskets up front. That's all there is to it. You can button everything back up and then you're set to go.